Layer 7 is finally out. You ready? Of course you are. After brutally destroying some of Hell's inhabitants and further toppling the natural order put in place by the angels, we continue to descend Hell, giving Sisyphus a smack along the way.
And die.
We then enter Layer 7, the Violence Layer. Firstly, we should consider a few things. In Dante's Inferno, there are many ways to get sent to this layer, each with their own distinct punishments. The first is to be violent against a neighbor, which grants you the punishment of being put into a river of blood, boiling you for eternity. Better put that gun down and make amends with that neighbor who plays music a little too fucking loud. Second is offing yourself, unplugging the game a bit too early, forcibly kicking the bucket, closing the book before it ends. Basically, if you purposefully die by your own hand, you get turned into a tree. There's some other stuff too, but I digress. Thirdly are sinners who offend God by directly destroying what he stands for. Blasphemy, basically. These guys are left in a desert of burning sand and rain. Oh yeah, and gay people are also punished here. Please note, this story is a product of its time. In reality, you're free to live your lifestyle and kill whoever you want. Keep these influences in mind as we enter the violence ring, and nothing. No, really. Everything I've just described is not at all present, as the entire area is shrouded in white. We see a few trees, but they don't seem to be alive in any way. Only several crosses decorate the area. We enter this white building only to be greeted with twisting hallways and strange turns. Creepy statues are shown with limbs joined together, blank faces and blood leaking out of every gap. We'll require a skull in order to move forward. An uneasiness spreads as the mannequins look at us. Jesus Christ, a few things to note about them in terms of combat. They are incredibly fast and can easily make you panic from the speed of their attacks. The best thing to do is to remain calm and destroy them with a projectile, parry an attack, hit them whilst they're climbing to make them lose their balance. Oh yeah, did I mention there's a book? There's some really strange ideas in here. The cross is referred to as the tree of life, which, through God, has allowed life to exist. The writer, presumably a sinner of the violence layer, then expands on this idea, calling the bodies a prison for the blood of the fruit. They want to release and display their insides under the tree of life, through the art of violence. The reader is then encouraged to engage in this violence by painting the world with blood. It's a great self-help book, but we have places to be and things to kill. You also hear moaning in a different part of the room. And no, not the good kind. So we know something is about to come up. As we progress, we continuously fight more mannequins before finally seeing the source of the noise. A giant bull-like creature destroys everything in its path, breaking down doors and destroying enemies. We move on, and using the blue skull, we navigate through this strange and colorless environment. A sense of uneasiness is felt as we enter a dark tunnel. As we go through the tracks, a rumbling is heard as music settles in. The giant bull creature we saw is now fast approaching us. We fight the Minotaur, a beast who uses his hammer and other maneuvers to try and destroy us. But now he's dead. Or is he? Let's try bringing a few details together. First off, the mannequins in the terminals are classified as lesser demons. This is unusual as typically sinners are identified as husks. We read on and learn that the departure of God resulted in many sinners attempting to escape the violent slayer, braving the labyrinth that lay at its edges, thinking they could find a way out in the absence of heaven's wardens. The fools who attempted would realize far too late that angels were not all that kept them from freedom, as the Garden of Forking Paths is no ordinary labyrinth, but one with malicious intent, overseen with cunning cruelty. The halls, similar enough to give no sense of direction, but different enough to grant no familiarity, would eventually exhaust each escapee. And as they fell into a deep sleep, the metamorphosis began. Each sinner was torn apart, joint by joint, their broken and shattered limbs shoved into hollow statues, starting them to life as the flesh and blood of mannequins. The gift of death is a rare privilege in hell, so sinners who attempted to control their fate now lie in eternal agony, unable to now control even their own bodies, which now continue to carry on the same punishment to other unfortunate fools. We know that the sinners are able to think for themselves, but cannot control their own movements. The sinners here were at least intelligent enough to record their findings in books, as well as attempt to navigate the labyrinth. But ultimately, the angels won over, leaving only their violent natures. The Minotaur is crossed out, with apparently no data being known about it. In case you didn't notice, the Minotaur actually has its name crossed out during the boss fight. All other text seems to be crossed out as well, but we can still make out the text. The Minotaur, one of the oldest known surviving demons, was sculpted by as a gift for the then Judge of Hell, Minos, in an attempt to form some kind of rapport. Though its creator considered it beautiful, a personalized monument of death and despair, Minos was terrified of the gross caricature of his past mistakes and cast it into the Garden of Forking Paths, hoping it would never be seen again. Now the Minotaur is old and its body failing, falling apart, running blind through the labyrinth in a desperate attempt to break out. Its only desire? To see the sky for one last time. An incredibly depressing account. It's no wonder the Minotaur, full of rage and seeing you as a force that could destroy its final wish, does everything it can to win. The censored out name is fascinating because the creator in mind wanted to build a rapport with Minos, yet saw death and despair as being a concept of beauty. Interesting. It is unlikely then that this mysterious figure was an angel, given the fascination for despair, but we will have to wait and see. In Greek mythology, Minos once prayed to Poseidon, who gave him a bull as a way of showing his favor towards him. In return, Minos was to sacrifice the bull for Poseidon. He refused, and so Poseidon made his wife Pasiphae fall in love with the bull. Pasiphae commissioned Daedalus, inventor and father of Icarus, to craft a hollow wooden cow, which Pasiphae used to have intercourse with the bull. She then gave birth to Asterius, who we now know as the Minotaur. Minos in turn would get Daedalus to construct a labyrinth to hold the Minotaur. A son of Minos, Androgeus, was killed by the Minotaur. Minos would then send 7 Athenian youths and maidens to be sacrificed to the Minotaur each year. After several lives of the Athenian people were lost, an Athenian, alongside King Minos' daughter, would venture the labyrinth and kill the Minotaur. Having learnt a small bit of Minos and his sins, it's no wonder his actions led him to hell. Yet his ruthlessness and strategy also made him a powerful and respected figure in Greece and in the afterlife. Imagine for a second that you kill your wife's son, conceived during your marriage and with a living animal nonetheless, all because you refuse to do a simple sacrifice. Imagine then having killed several innocents to feed the Minotaur itself. Having his mistakes be recreated and presented in front of him must have caused him immense suffering, and so doing what he did in his previous life, he cast the Minotaur into a labyrinth, left to suffer in pain and agony. It's a wonder so many souls get lost in this layer, given that after a bit of trial and error, the layer is fairly easy to navigate. But then again, a lot of the sinners can't perform some of the complicated maneuvers that we do. Now, onto the next level. We fight an enemy called the Gutter Man. It has the ability to shoot at us with a minigun and also has a shield to protect itself with, which we can break to give us an advantage. We also find a skeleton on the back of the Gutter Men, which is where they got their source of blood. We then open up to an enormous war taking place with giant machines in the background. The first section focuses on violence as a kind of grotesque art form, where everyone is left to fight each other in a ritualistic manner. The second section, however, is much more literal, representing the warfare that once took place on Earth. Missiles land from the sky, releasing enemies for you to fight. A tower falls as we continue to fight more enemies. Finally entering a bunker-like area, we find peace from the war above. Covered in blood is the word exit. The only problem being that the exit is covered by debris. Our goal now, as we narrowly avoid gunfire, landmines, and an entirely new enemy that shoots missiles, is to place a bomb on the tracks. We enter the final area with smoke above us. We can choose to kill every enemy with some difficulty and move forward, but the challenge of the level does pique my interest. So I restart the level and try out different maneuvers for avoiding enemies instead of killing them. If we progress without activating the gate, we can find a text. After the angels disperse, the sinners saw a chance to escape, choosing in groups to carefully navigate their way out of the labyrinth. The archive itself can be navigated without spawning enemies if the instructions are followed. A book left by one of the sinners to help everyone else escape paints an interesting picture of kindness, especially in a layer such as this. Now we know very little about the war that took place in Ultrakill, but the Gutterman and the Gutter Tank logs provide some pretty valuable insight. We learn that the Gutter Man was one of the first machines to use blood as fuel, and the first automatons to be used in the war. We learn that the war itself had 3 phases. The first phase was an era of trench warfare. Those in charge of heaven used the Guttermen as inspiration for the mannequins. This is because the Guttermen were fueled by living people kept on minimal life support, welded shut. Thus, the same fate of stuffing people into vessels was made for these poor sinners. The second era of the war was thanks to the introduction of the Gutter Tank, a machine which had the ability to destroy thick armor. The second era of the war was focused solely on machine warfare. As each machine was developed, another was made to counteract it. The Gutter Tank easily wiped out the Gutterman machines. Soldiers could now return home, becoming obsolete in the battlefield, but much to their horror, all resources were used for developing even more machines, preventing any prosperity from taking place. Can anyone guess what the third and final phase of the war was? The next segment is all about the third punishment I talked about. If you look closely at the trees, many of them resemble human faces. There is a lot of metaphor here with the Tree of Life being mentioned in the first text. As in Dante's Inferno, we know that those who suffer here have taken their own lives, and as such do not get to experience the pleasures of being human. Unlike other beings who oftentimes show some semblance of humanity, through their build and movement, the trees can only watch on in pain and suffering as they remain in place. We can feed the tree by killing nearby enemies made of blood, which in turn causes leaves to emerge. Navigating this maze is honestly pretty creepy, as you're left with only V1's flashlight to see ahead of you. The goal is to activate all the trees with blood until the leaves emerge. We then see enemies proceed to slaughter each other. After activating all 4 trees, we can then proceed to the exit, but it is still uncertain as to what the bloody figures are. I theorize that even if you decide to kill a husk, they still come back to life, albeit very slowly. These bloody figures can even produce some of the same attacks as other enemies. As the log told us before, the gift of death is a rare privilege in Hell. We emerge into the final level and find the earthmover. A beast that could easily destroy us through one swift movement. Just when it is about to do that, another earthmover ends up attacking it. Destroying the security system, we fight the center of the earthmover. We narrowly escape before the earthmover self-destructs. Now to learn about the final phase of the war. The last era of the war started thanks to the earthmovers, who had the ability to easily wipe out entire cities. They were large enough to house a shield generator, which explains why they fought each other without taking any damage. They were apparently built to be mobile, yet the earthmover we fight does not move, its feet instead grounded with a strange blood-like substance, perhaps from the 4 trees we activated below. Earthmovers required both blood and solar power to function. Civilians were smart enough to evacuate onto earthmovers when Earth became a wasteland. The Earth entered what is referred to as the Long Night, in which soot, smoke, and decay blocked out sunlight, resulting in the earthmovers dying and falling one by one. After 200 years of war, the world could finally enter the new peace, an era in which people would work together to help solve the climate catastrophe. Now, although there isn't any sunlight in Hell, I assume that these earthmover machines use Hell energy or have far more blood supply than on Earth. It may also be using technology crafted from Hell. Before I end the video, I'd like to point out that each machine was made to counteract the other. It is quite possible that V1 was designed to take down earthmovers, hence why a machine our size was able to so easily maneuver this giant monster. Oh yeah, I forgot something. Behold, gathered in the deepest and most hidden away parts of the violence layer lies the embodiments of violence itself. Big Johninator. To finish off, we find one last text. Feel free to read the whole thing, but what grabs my attention is the sentence. Dead end after dead end. Is there really no way out? Get lost in the labyrinth. Die in the battlefield, or get lost in the forest. If a sinner is writing about dying here despite deaths in hell being so rare, then perhaps we haven't really killed or freed any of the husks in the previous layers, as they are slowly revived into something else entirely. We can only hope that our actions in destroying hell's order gives these sinners a chance to escape, or at the very least, have their punishment diminished.